KSL News Time 5:49. Time for the KSL In-Depth. No one seems to want a new homeless shelter facility in their neighborhood right now. West Valley City Police Chief Lee Russo is speaking live at the state capitol. This comes just ahead of an open house tonight about the 5 sites proposed by Salt Lake County last week, including 3 in West Valley. Let's listen to the police chief.
And change. And that created a level of concern to me, because it suggests that, are we doing something before we understand fully what's about to happen? Are we putting the solution in front of the problem? Immediately after, he followed up with a statement where he actually indicated, we've been studying this for months. We understand what contributes to homelessness and what needs to be done about it. And again, that created a level of concern. What is it? We're getting a mixed message. In one second, we're hearing that we don't fully understand this problem. We know that this is going to evolve, and in the next statement, we know what's going on and we know what's going to happen. Now, specifically about our city and what's going on. As I said, we've not had an opportunity to assess the impact of a homeless shelter and how it will affect the communities where they're proposing the placement be. I can tell you, having been a chief in another city where we've had homeless shelters, the impacts are considerable. Not necessarily from a violent crime standpoint, but from a maintenance of order standpoint. Not only when the police respond to these calls for service at these facilities, they're not just one officer going. Usually it's 2 officers, and that's problematic. I have 8 patrol beats that we regularly staff in West Valley City. 2 officers go to a call at this facility. That's 25% of my on-duty staffing at that moment going to this facility. That means communities will be left unguarded because of this decision. We are not being granted extra resources. Our city is simply being told we will accept this and have to deal with it. No extra funds, no extra police officers. It's putting communities at risk, and we're concerned about that. We want the opportunity to fully vet this and understand it and be prepared for it. We are not like Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City has a large economic engine, a tourism industry, a convention industry. We are not similarly situated in West Valley City that way. They have a police department of over 500 officers. We barely break 200, yet we nearly handle as many calls for service in a year as they do. And we're going to add this to our city. It doesn't seem appropriate. It doesn't seem logical. I think it places our city at risk. In addition to that, medical services. Our ambulances, medical runs to these facilities will increase. Just think about a heart attack somewhere in our city, and we have an ambulance for a crisis up at a shelter. Means one of our citizens may not get an immediate response that they normally would get. We haven't had the opportunity to discuss these kinds of impacts with the county, and I think that that's inappropriate. I think that speaks against the democratic process. And our citizens deserve public safety at all costs. Thank you.
Is there one particular site that you are concerned about above the others?
Well, really, I'm concerned about all 3 of them. The Printers Row site is closely located to an apartment complex where we already have a high volume for calls for service. We have gang activity. We have a high volume of property crimes and violent crime. We're going to put this facility in close proximity to that and aggravate that problem and draw resources away from what we're already trying to deal with.
You mentioned not necessarily a rise in violent crime, but a rise in other kinds of crime. Could you be more specific about what that entails?
What you typically see with these kinds of complexes, disorderly behaviors, loitering behaviors, trash. You'll see an undermining of community security, a fear of crime will begin to increase. People feel less secure in their personal safety as they move through the community. It really has an undermining and detrimental effect. And it's not that West Valley City is saying that we're turning our back on this homeless situation. That is not the case at all. We have over 33,000 affordable units in our city where we provide opportunities for housing. 17.2% of the Section 8 vouchers in this county are used in West Valley City. We understand and we recognize and we provide those kinds of opportunities for people in need of housing. Despite that, the city has proactively worked to blend that into a growth strategy over the last 2 decades and has also developed upscale housing, designed livable communities, and has made progress. The problem here is the county has simply cast that aside and arbitrarily made a decision without our input that frustrates and undermines that kind of progress.
Where should the site go instead?
You know, do I have a specific site in mind? No, but I would like to be at the table, or at least have the city at the table to discuss where those opportunities can be.
And Chief, you briefly touched on it, but you've experienced this firsthand before in a different city.
Yes, I have. As I said, that's why I know. These are 2 officer calls. They are a drain on our resources. All you have to do really is look at Salt Lake City. Look at the newscast. Look at the enforcement sweeps from last year and what they have been dealing with. It tells you what happens in and around these kinds of facilities and what they've been dealing with. I applaud the city for taking this issue on. I feel for them, but we certainly have to get ahead of it and do something. But the question is, we don't want to transfer that problem somewhere else to someone else that doesn't have the capability or give them the assistance to deal with it. If you look at these locations, specifically inside of West Valley City, they are strategically placed in a position where the county's not going to have to police them. It will strictly fall on West Valley City.
South Salt Lake doesn't want a homeless shelter. The folks in Sugar House didn't want a shelter. You don't want a shelter. Who's right, and why is your case more convincing than theirs?
Well, I can tell you just simply because of the taxing services that we're dealing with put a strain on us. It's not that they're saying here's a shelter and here's half a dozen more police officers, or here's another 2 ambulances or more firefighters, or here's $1 million extra for you, West Valley, to deal with this problem. It's not like we've been invited to the table where our citizens have had an opportunity to discuss this and say, yeah, this is a right fit for us. It's simply been said, get on board with this decision because this is what's going to happen.
Do you think it would have been better had, say, city officials been told, hey, look, we're thinking about maybe putting one in West Valley, you guys come up with a possible site, instead of maybe the county doing that for them?
I certainly would think any dialogue's better than no dialogue. So in answer to the question, yes, I think bringing us in early and having these discussions would have been much more appropriate than where we are now. Now we're in the midst of the crisis, and that's not the time to start the dialogue.
What makes you say that you think the county strategically placed these so that they wouldn't have to police them?
Take a look at the map. The areas where they're placed are not a responsibility of UPD or the county sheriffs to police. They strictly will fall on either South Salt Lake or the West Valley City Police Department.
So it sounds like your big concern is a drain on resources for your police
Well, it's a
department?
drain on resources, and that's going to translate into additional dollars spent by the local jurisdiction without funding coming into the city. Again, we might be the 2nd largest city in the state of Utah, but it doesn't mean we have the same economic capacity as a Salt Lake City to take this on.
So to Salt Lake County saying this time will be different, you're not convinced of that?
Every city that builds a shelter, or every organization that builds a shelter, says ours will be different.
You're listening to West Valley Police Chief Lee Russo, who says before he got on the air, he said that he learned about the West Valley Homeless Center sites listening to a podcast of the Doug Wright Show. Yes, you can listen to KSL On Demand on the KSL News Radio app, sponsored by Solarus Solar Energy. KSL News Time, 5:59.